Hi, everyone. It's Alex Savidge from KTVU, Fox 2 News here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we want to talk today about this antibody drug cocktail that President Trump took following his diagnosis with COVID last week. And to do that, we want to bring in Dr. Peter Chin Hong, an infectious disease specialist at UCSF here in the Bay Area. Doctor, good to have you on. I'm sure you heard President Trump calling this antibody cocktail that he took last week a cure for COVID. Let me first get your thoughts there. Is that how you would characterize this treatment?
No, Alex, I definitely wouldn't call it a cure for COVID. It's something we are very enthusiastic about, but we need more data, and it certainly will never be a cure for COVID. There's no cure for COVID at the moment by any stretch of the imagination. And Regeneron or not, we are still in search of the right combination of drugs. It'll probably take a combination to find that sweet spot of a cure.
All right, but as you said, there is certainly some promise to this particular cocktail, this antibody cocktail. These are monoclonal antibodies. Can you explain for everyone sort of the nuts and bolts of how this treatment works and what we know about its effectiveness?
Great. I think to understand monoclonal antibodies, it's best to come back to the general concept of convalescent plasma, because I think people understand convalescent plasma. Somebody has seen COVID, they battled through it, they were successful. So we're going to harvest those fighting cells, those antibodies, those soldiers that they made to fight the infection because they were successful, and we're going to put it into somebody who's battling it at the moment. Kind of like soldiers when you didn't have enough and you didn't train your soldiers. So what do you do in these monoclonal antibodies in the lab is like you pick like the best or the elite soldiers and you just like make clones of them. And you can do that in a company or a factory or a biotech lab. And you take the elite antibodies, and in the case of monoclonal antibodies, you take one of the elite ones. And in case of a cocktail, you take maybe a couple of them, the two of the best kinds, and then you infuse them into a patient. The reason why monoclonal antibodies or a cocktail of more than one is important these days is because you can like make a super pure product. You know exactly what you're giving. You know that soldier has been super trained well. Right. And in convalescent plasma, you don't know what you're getting.
It's kind of miss. Yeah. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And as you just mentioned, there's the one company, Regeneron, and that's the cocktail that President Trump took last week. There's also a second company, Lilly, that is also seeking emergency use authorization from the FDA. So as we talked about, the early results seem promising here, but neither of these treatments has undergone full clinical trials yet. So what more do we need to learn in terms of, with both of these companies, with the similar antibody cocktail treatments, what they're going through still the clinical trials that are necessary. So what additional data do we all need to see before this is distributed to the public?
I think the answer is pretty straightforward, Alex. It's really rare for a company to go for EUA unless there's some final data with statistical significance. So if they're going with partial data, like maybe people felt better, but no hard outcome data, like it prevented hospitalizations or deaths, it's going to be a really tough call. And the data is in the process of being accrued, so it's not really final yet. So I think a lot of people are worried that once you give EUA or FDA sort of approval, that the current trials will be in jeopardy, because if you or I, Alex, were offered to be in a trial, but it's already approved, you don't want to be in a trial because there's a 50% chance that you wouldn't get the real thing.
Right. So talk a little bit. I mean, we hear the president talk about his experience, and he says, well, look, he now admits, he was not feeling great when he got sent to Walter Reed a week ago. And he says, look, he was given this treatment here, this antibody treatment, and he immediately felt better. But, it's so important in medicine to not rely on those sorts of anecdotal stories and outcomes.
That's a great point, Alex. And that gives us the reason for doing a randomized control trial. In a randomized control trial, you have a placebo group and you don't know who's getting the drug and who's getting the placebo. And the importance of a placebo group, a group that's not getting the real thing or pretend drug, is that people might get better on their own without the drug. And you want to compare the two groups to make sure that people got better because of the drug that you're giving.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important. Do you think that these companies are going to get the emergency use authorization? How do you think that plays out?
I think if the FDA is going to rigorously look at the data, I'd be surprised if they give the FDA emergency use authorization at this point, given that the data hasn't matured yet, unless we haven't seen all the data. And there's a possibility that in the press releases that they haven't shown all the data they have. But again, it's going to have a lot of implications if there is an EUA, mainly for the scientific integrity of the ongoing trials. And it's not only Lilly and Regeneron we're talking about. There are actually a host of other trials ongoing with monoclonal and antibodies and antibody cocktails, and including those sponsored by our government and the National Institutes of Health. So I think, a lot of fallout if this has emergency use authorization, similar to the discussion around EUA of convalescent plasma and why that didn't go through after outcry from the scientific community.
One of the question here, and it sort of comes back to the president, because he's the sort of one of the case studies that I guess we have here with this antibody cocktail. So it was reported that he had developed, they had picked up on antibodies. His body had developed these antibodies. And it sort of raises the question, I guess, for a layperson like myself, were these antibodies that his body naturally produced, or could these have just been antibodies that were a result of the cocktail that he took? Did this happen naturally, or was this sort of an artificial thing?
It certainly most seems that it was due to the drug Regeneron, because he got a huge dose. It was like if you went to the Whole Foods and you got a small piece of salmon, which is what I'm usually able to afford, and then, or you got a whole chunk of salmon and you're trying to eat that salmon for dinner. Well, the salmon is still floating around, and essentially that is what's happened. And it has implications because it really were his own antibodies. It means that we'd have to backtrack his time of infection to much earlier. And potentially more people would have been exposed, because people don't start developing antibodies until 2 or 3 weeks after their infection. So, it's really critical how he presents it, but it's certainly most likely due to the Regeneron. And what it means critically is that he's still potentially infectious.
Right, and that's one of the open questions here, as his team says he's going to continue campaigning here sometime in the not too distant future. I think it's also, I'm sure you would say, it's important to kind of broaden out and remember that someone like the president and other COVID patients, they're receiving a broad array of drugs and various treatments that we have available to us. So remember, right, obviously the president's taking remdesivir, he's taking the dexamethasone, that powerful steroid as well. So to sort of key in on the antibody cocktail as being the one thing that helped him out and got him back on the right track, it seems like you can't do that. I mean, it's always going to be the array of treatments that makes the difference, right?
Definitely, and we call that anecdotal medicine and not evidence-based medicine.
All right. So the point is, on this antibody cocktail, just to sort of bring it back and put a bow on it, the point is, on this antibody cocktail, we can't put all our eggs in this one basket here. There are some signs that this could be helpful for COVID patients, but we can't say that this is the one thing that's going to make everybody better.
Definitely not, and nothing in medicine really works that immediately unless an anti-inflammatory might, like steroids. It's like when you take ibuprofen for a headache, that works immediately. That's how steroids work, multiplied by 100. And it's really weird that a monoclonal or antibody cocktail would that work that quickly. It just doesn't work like that.
All right. Well, we appreciate you getting us up to speed on this experimental treatment here for COVID-19. Obviously, things moving so rapidly in the COVID world, with all of these different treatments, that it's sometimes hard to keep up and figure out what's going on. So thank you for the information, Dr. Peter Chin Hong, infectious disease specialist at UCSF. Really appreciate you taking the time. I'm Alex Savidge from KTVU, Fox 2 News in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll talk to you next time.